Graphing straight lines. Every straight line has a rule that relates y and x and lets us get a set of coordinates that form a straight line on the number plane. So one of our major skills is obtaining a set of points from a rule, plotting them on a number plane, and thus graphing the line. So your rule will always be in the form y equals and something that changes from x. To create a table of values, we start with x on the top, y underneath, and a table of values is effectively saying, well, what if x was -3, what would y be? What if x was -2? What if it was -1? Now really you only need 2 points to plot any line. It's a very good idea to have at least 3 points so that it's more evident if you make a mistake, because if they don't all end up in a line, you know you've done something wrong. But a lot of the tables of values will actually go from -3 up to 3 for x, and so we'll make sure we can do that. So when you draw your table of values, x on the top, and you choose some values of x. Substitute the value for x into the rule. So our rule is y equals -3x plus 1. If it wasn't given there, you'd always write it just above or below the table of values, usually above. It's a very good idea to start at 0, because when x is 0, well, -3 times 0 is just 0, plus 1 is 1. So you'll notice that this part of the rule, I'll just get a different colour, the number that's on its own, that's not connected to the x, is always going to be the value of y when x is 0. When you've got your 0 value for x and found that for y, then it's a good idea to move into the positives because they're easier to find. So when x is 1, what's y? Well, this -3x means -3 times x, so -3 times 1 is -3, plus 1 is -2. When x is 2, -3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is -5. When x is 3, -3 times 3 is -9, plus 1 is -8. Now when you've got your positive part of the number of the table of values finished, it's actually quite interesting to look at the pattern. As x goes up by 1, what happens to y? From 1 to -2, that's -3. -2 to -5, that's -3. -5 to -8, that's -3. This part of the rule, the coefficient of x, tells you the change in y for every one change in x. So as x goes up by 1, y goes down by 3. Now what this means is that if you're not as great as you'd like to be with the negatives over here, you can actually just follow the reverse pattern back. So if it's -3 to go this way, it'll be +3 to go this way. 4, 7, 10. Now what that does, you could always just substitute them in, but it's harder that way. What this does is it gives you 6 pairs, or 7 pairs in this case, of coordinates. This point on the line is -3, 10. From now, we want to draw a number plane and graph that line. Make sure that your number plane is large enough, so I'm going to need to go out to, well, at least 8, but probably 10 if I can fit it, and I can't quite fit 10. That's a pity. Put your lines on the grid lines and put even gradations on the grid lines. It's actually a good idea to use pencil. I'm using pen just so you can see it more clearly. So the even gradations are the little lines that divide my number line up. And make sure that your two axes go on the grid lines and that each of your little gradations goes on a grid line. So it's important to be able to set up a number plane. Your number planes get an arrow, your number lines or your axes get an arrow, and we label X and Y. Label your gradations. Now normally you'd try to make it big enough that you could fit the largest of your values. So I need to go out to -8 and up to 10, and that's a bit of a disappointment because I didn't have enough grid paper. So you set up your axes and you plot the points. So after you've done your table of values, you will plot the points. -3, 10, I won't, oh look, I can just squeeze that in, it's right there. -2, 7, -1, 4, 0, 1, 1, -2, now, they should all form a straight line. If they don't form a straight line, you've done something wrong. Join your dots very carefully with a ruler and make sure that you fill the whole number plane. Don't just sort of keep it in this tiny little area here. Arrows at either end. And you label your line with its rule. Its rule was y equals -3x plus 1. And that is how you plot a line from the rule to the table to the graph. There's a skill we also need, which is checking if a point is on a line. So for example, decide if the points 1, 3 and -2, -4 lie on the line y equals 3x. For this, make a tiny little table of values just with the x values in those points. Fill in your table of values and see if you get the y values. When y is 3 times x, 3 times -2 is -6. This point is not on the line. For it to be on the line, we'd have to get a -4 when x was -2. Y equals 3 times x. When x is 1, 3 times 1 is 3. This point, sorry, that should be a no. No and yes. And that's sufficient working just to do a little table of values.